Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you all for logging into this Sikh Research Institute webinar today. My name is Jagdeep Singh. I'll be the host for today's session, and Narendra Pal Singh will be the moderator. Nandeep Singh will begin the presentation shortly, but before he starts, I'll take a few moments to run through some information to help ensure this session runs smoothly for all of us. Narendra Pal Singh will then provide some information about the Institute and Nandeep Singh before handing over for the main presentation. Firstly, just to provide some orientation on the main screen you're looking at now, Nandeep's presentation will be displayed on the left-hand side of the screen. You will be able to see each slide as you scroll through, although you won't be able to navigate through the slides independently. On the right-hand side of the screen, you should see a number of smaller panes, and if you can't see any right now, then please click on the Panels drop-down menu, which is towards the top right-hand of the screen, and select the Reset to Default option, and you should now be able to see a participant panel and a chat panel. During the session, if you wish to ask Nandeep Singh questions at any time, you can do so by entering your question in the chat panel, which should be beneath the participant pane, and addressing it to Narendra Pal Singh. Alongside your question, please include your full name and your city, and indicate whether or not you have a microphone attached to your computer. Narendra Pal Singh will moderate the questions as applicable and forward them to Nandeep Singh. If you have a microphone, Nandeep Singh will invite you to come and ask your question. If you do not, he will read out your question to the participants. Please note, if you have a microphone that's integrated into your laptop or your desktop, then you will have to press the control button while you speak. At the end of the main presentation, there will be a general Q&A session. Again, if you'd like to ask questions during this time, then please forward them to Narendra Pal Singh using the chat panel, and you will be invited by Nandeep Singh to ask your question. Again, as a reminder, please provide your name, city, and indication of mic in your message. If for any reason you experience any technical difficulties during the session and you can't see the main presentation, for example, then please don't hesitate to contact me via the chat panel. If you lose your internet connection, or if you have to restart your computer during the session, then you can rejoin the session by clicking on the URL that was included in your original registration email. Finally, at the end of the presentation, we'll launch a testimonial and feedback window, and would appreciate if you could take a few moments to provide your feedback and comments on how the session went, and on how we can improve future sessions. I'll now hand you over to Narendra Pal Singh, who will provide some background to the Institute, and also to Nandeep Singh. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name is Narendra Pal Singh. I will be the moderator for today's session. We are delighted to have you with us. Let me share a bit about the Sikh Research Institute, or SikhRI. Over the last 7 years, SikhRI focused on community development through programs, leadership programs developing visionaries, trained 3,000 worldwide, educational seminars stopping misinformation reached 300,000 globally, K-12 services teaching values and language skills served 41 schools, 500 teachers, and 1,700 students. We ask for your financial support to continue this work. Please donate by visiting us on the web at www.sikhri.com. Thank you. Let us begin our session. Your instructor today will be Nandeep Singh. Nandeep Singh is a grassroots Sikh community activist that brings local and international perspectives. An organizer within the Jakarta movement, Nandeep Singh's interest lies at the interstices of social and health justice within the Sikh community and beyond. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you to Sikh Research Institute for hosting me, and a special thank you for all of you that took time out of your morning to come listen to me speak. Although it's not always the best format because it's a little bit less interactive and I don't get to see all of you, but we'll do the best we can given circumstances. Hopefully I keep you guys awake, and hopefully we actually have an interesting session that kind of comes out of this. So as I flip through the slides, so the topic that I was going to touch upon today, I've titled it Creating a Global Movement. What I hope to kind of focus on is to look at various topics today, especially that concerning the usage of the internet. Obviously, this is a tool that many of us, that's what's bringing us right now, as we get together in a host of different areas to come together. So basically looking at the internet as a medium, how it's been used, a little bit tracing its history, and its history in terms of within the Sikh community, and how it is connected to the development of Sikh organizations and Sikh institutions, specifically within the United States, but hopefully within a discussion we can talk beyond the frames of just a certain nationalist paradigm. So the contents that I'll be looking at today is kind of, it's a little bit wrong to read this as this will be exactly the order, but what we will be talking about a little bit today is kind of tracing offline activism, its relationship to online activism, the conjunctions where they meet, where they haven't met, a little bit about sort of what I would call the hype of the internet, ways that many had prophesized that people would kind of come together in sort of new possibilities within the internet that haven't always come to fruition, as well as what are the actual possibilities of using this medium, what are some best practices to use, and what are some of the organizations that are actually doing that. So let us go ahead and begin. I opened this discussion kind of talking about 1984 as the critical event. It is academics have used this language as 1984 as the critical event in terms of understanding probably fundamentally within at least the last 50 years, the most important event that happened within the Sikh community. In many ways, the activism that we see today, as well as forms of media, have all kind of stemmed from this as the critical event. So throughout the conversation today, I will continuously refer back to 1984 because it does begin, it is that the events that began in 1984, but then subsequently throughout the 80s and 90s, and in many ways even today, has been the point to sort of initiate an understanding of what were some of the political projects and how did the internet kind of mold those, as well as how did it seem to reflect those projects that came about. So I begin by talking about what I'll call Generation 1 offline activists. This is obviously a schema, and it's not quite perfect, and in any time you're creating a general narrative, not everything will fit into this, and there'll be oftentimes areas of overlap. But what it does kind of give you an idea a little bit about how the community has kind of moved along to kind of trace activism, specifically, as I stated in the beginning, within the United States, but many of these things, hopefully people can look at their own local communities, wherever they may be in the world, and see that how it has affected them in their local communities. What I call Generation 1 offline activists, this is, at least within the United States, that population that came from Punjab, mostly in the 1970s, and 1960s and 1970s, as well as the early part of the 1980s. It was within this specific community that we often saw directly or indirectly experienced the events linked to 1984. It was also within this generation that we saw a proliferation of the Gurdwaras as the Central Sikh Institute recreated the world over, and as long as Sikhs have been a diasporic movement, where this has always been the center and the first institution that the Sikhs create. It was also these Generation 1 activists that also we see the creation of sort of mediums of instruction to the youth. And it's through this that we saw the early camps, oftentimes, and retreats, and as well as the beginning of what have sort of become institutionalized as Punjabi schools, as well as Khalsa schools. And it's important to sort of reflect on these institutions created by this first generation that arrived, because in many ways, these continue to be the most important institutions within the community, as well as they are the heartbeat, the nerve center of the community, as well as the main modus of instruction happens within these centers, and it will continue to always be the case. During this same period, we also saw beginning, without going into the history of the internet, but specifically around 1995, 1996, and the latter half of the 1990s, we also began to see the proliferation of the Sikh presence on the internet. And it's in this early stage that the internet, as it continues today in many ways, became very much sort of dominated as a Khalistani space, very much related to the political projects that were going on in the Punjab. The early websites, some of you that have been on the internet, at least since that time, maybe some of these images may strike a chord or remember seeing these on various websites. But they kind of included, for instance, websites such as khalistan.net, Sikhs.org, Fort Band Khalsa, and there are scores and scores of others. As mentioned before, what you particularly saw during this this beginning period of the internet and the beginning phase of Sikh presence on the internet is very much that emphasis on the politics of the Punjab, on content distribution, which I sort of term to be in the sense that it was that much as sort of related to kind of Web 1.0, that these were supposed to be informational websites. It was to tell the Sikh story. Many of the images tell their own story, and many of the images that we have that are in some ways most impressed upon within the Sikh psyche even today have come from the distribution that was created by these websites. And we still see the focus of the question, who are the Sikhs? That's why Sikhs.org, SikhNet, most of these, in light of kind of trying to oppose an image of Sikhs as terrorists, that this became sort of a dominating question for, as it has been for the 20th century, but for a little bit of a different political charge than it had been in the past. With the events of September 11th, again, as I'm referring mainly within the United States, it's only with the September 11th really that you kind of see what I'll term as sort of coming out of the Generation 1.5. What Generation 1.5 refers to are those Sikhs that were spent many times their formative years in South Asia. And it was, and many of them came, especially high school or pre-high school, to, like I said, in this specific case study that we're talking about, to the United States. Many of them were, in fact, young witnesses to the genocide that we saw, the state-sponsored pogroms in 1984. Many of them, interesting enough, did not happen to be come from Punjab in particular. And where you really sort of see kind of their emphasis is to bridge that gap between those Sikhs that are born here and those that were born in, here I wrote Punjab, but it could be, I guess, South Asia in general. And it's really that where you had seen kind of the seeds of this generation planted earlier, but it is really with September 11th that we sort of start seeing a real kind of push forward, and as I kind of stated in this, a coming out within this generation. And many of the most prominent organizations that we talk about today within the community, including the Sikh Research Institute, which we're talking about today, really kind of begin to come out during this period. It's not to say that other organizations don't have an older trajectory or an older history, but really sort of where they become especially important in the community conscious really begins at this stage, post 9/11. What you also saw during this kind of generation 1.5 is sort of how the internet began to be used in new ways. It was basically through much more interactive tools. While we saw especially content distribution as the primary focus of the early Sikh internet presence, it was kind of this generation 1.5 that began using and interacting with each other in new ways. For instance, Smart, which is in its newer reincarnation as Saldef, was actually born from these early Sikh listservs. These were groups of Sikhs that began to really form, I would call, the post-Khalistani global network. Well, during the kind of later phase of the Khalistani networks, where bonds had been forged either in Punjab or beyond, oftentimes on kind of political allegiances, but also taking into account kin networks. Here you saw something very interesting that began to take shape in this sort of post-Khalistani network. It was really through these listservs that many, many hundreds of Sikhs throughout the world began to kind of come together, began to know one another. There was Khalsanet. There were a number of these listservs. And as mentioned, you actually begin to see them bear fruit, with Smart, as it was called at the time, being one of the very first Sikh organizations that grew out of that. You also saw, as well as listservs, you also see, as well as listservs, the new models. Excuse me, sorry for one second. You also see a number of websites that really began to be sort of extremely important in the community at the time. During the early 2000s, we saw, for instance, one website, SikhRI.com, which was, to my memory, actually probably one of the most important as a stage within the community, where it had fresh original content, as well as those that began to kind of see themselves as Sikh activists, often and that were on the internet anyways, were usually kind of engaging with that website. Discussions were happening on that website. Like I said, the fresh content, this is what kind of really gave it its life force. Also, I'm being reminded as well that if you have any questions, please feel free to send them to Narinder Paul, and we can take those. And feel free, if I can elaborate on a point as I go through this. Narinder Paul is, as moderator, is there to facilitate any questions as well. But going back, so SikhRI.com was really this kind of moment where we saw kind of a much greater level of interaction, where what had conversations that had been going on various listservs really begin to kind of come together onto an internet presence. And the SikhRI.com still has many of its old archives are still available on the internet by accessing, for instance, the Internet Web Archive. And you can kind of see that sort of the levels of discussion and thought that were happening there and then at that time. From these Generation 1.5 organizations, you are seeing them begin to embrace new tools. Many of them have been sort of very quick to do these, although, as I'll turn to, many oftentimes not in very effective ways. Facebook being one of the most important social media that we see today. Others including Twitter, webinars which we're on today, as well as the continuation, although not quite to the same extent, of email groups as well as listservs as a form of, it's still, for the most part, a form of content distribution. And here's sort of where you'll begin to start seeing a dichotomy as, or at least a difference anyways, between the Generation 1.5 activism and the Generation 2 that I'm about to proceed to as well, where still in this group, for the most part, the usage of, for instance, Facebook or Twitter is just primarily as an advertisement tool. There isn't really kind of where social media and, as people are beginning to call Web 2.0, comes together, where there begins to be a real exchange. Still, for the most part, especially within these 1.5 generation groups, these are primarily forms of only advertisement. You kind of just, you use them to get the word out, but that sort of exchange that people are beginning to look for in social media doesn't really occur at that level yet. Generation 2 activism. By Generation 2, I'm talking now by those young Sikhs, definitely born within the United States. One of the examples I'm looking at on the screen as well, of a specifically Canadian Sikh youth organization as well. One of the best websites to definitely check out is that of the Sikh Activist Network. Here you have a full integration. It can be viewed sort of at the bottom at sikhactivist.net. And here you're starting to see a better integration of the possibilities and capabilities of the Internet being kind of used, where they have an integrated blog. It's interactive. There's areas for discussion. There are forums, as well as the usage of new media, including images, including videos. All of this is sort of being integrated to allow those Sikhs not just to be receptors of information, but actually participants in the creation and making of that information as well. And I would highly, highly advise anyone interested in such things to definitely check out the Sikh Activist Network. Here you also have examples slightly different from that what we saw in the Generation 1.5 activism. While in the Generation 1.5 activism, if I go back and just keep those, for instance, the logos of these organizations on the screen, one thing that becomes very noticeable is basically that many of these organizations model themselves after national organizations. They saw a lack of a Sikh voice at a national level, and many have sort of tried to fill that out. With United Sikhs being an exception in the sense that in many ways it really is an international organization. With what you also see as a difference with these three organizations is many of these three also grew at a period where services provided to the youth at that time, when these kind of Generation 1.5 activists were growing up, were not always available at the Gurdwara. Many of these organizations in some way function outside the Gurdwara or supra-Gurdwara. And there are various reasons for that, and there are various understandings of that. But in many ways, they have located themselves, although at times within the Gurdwara for specific needs, but that is not their central base. That is not their center of functioning, and the services they provide are a little bit different than that. When I turn now to the Generation 2 activism, here you're starting to see is the youth that grew up in this generation, it was that Generation 1, those that created the Punjabi schools, those that created the Khalsa schools, those that created the camps. It's actually these youth today, making groups such as the Sikh Activist Network, the Jakarta movement, and many others, they did grow up in that. In many ways, they're much more linked and tied to the Gurdwara. The Gurdwara becomes sort of their arena of where their projects are located. It also has to do with sort of their missions as well. in the sense that, for instance, these two organizations in particular are very much concerned of the internal functionings and internal problems within the Sikh community as well. So obviously, being sort of internally based, they're very much aware and find it very much kind of important to operate within the Gurdwara space. So that's kind of a little bit of kind of a point to at least highlight that where you do have, in a sense, a return to the Gurdwara. And in many ways, you can read that as a product of their youth involvement with the Gurdwara and what were the services and what were their experiences with the Gurdwara at the time when they were young. So how are these organizations beginning to engage with new tools? A huge one is the blog. For instance, websites such as the Langar Hall are meant not to be only content basically distributors, but also a place for greater feedback, engagement, and discussion. Whether that always occurs on the internet or not in the way that we wish it would, that's obviously a conversation that we could have at a different time. But in many ways, the invitation for kind of greater engagement continues to be there. As well as what we see is a combination of tools that you can't really just use one system. For instance, any of these organizations, they will be continuing to use conference calls, emails, blogs, Facebook. Much of your interaction still has to take feedback from within the organization and within the community. And so you have a combination of tools of those that are internet related, as well as those that continue to be traditional means. But this is sort of the effective balance that each organization must come up with. What has been sort of the hype of the internet? There was a belief at the time, especially I would say in the early 2000s, of kind of an idea of a virtual cyber sangat that became very popular. And in some ways this sort of occurred, but in many ways in my belief, it really cannot occur in the way that many people envision it. The idea was that here you have a number of Sikhs that can kind of engage in learning and coming together throughout the world and find those that have kind of similar ideologies, similar mindsets, and kind of similar ways of thinking. But in so many ways, as these kind of groups have congregated, especially on various message boards and forums that we have, what I've also noticed is this particular type of radicalization. We do have a number of websites on the internet that basically openly advocate for violence, especially within the community, that are quick to label Sikhs. If they do something against the idea of this group, from the name Singh, S-I-N-G-H, the G gets removed and it becomes Sin, somehow referring to them sort of as they become a Hindu, so to speak. And in many ways, the internet, instead of always engaging in greater inclusivity, as well as kind of more feedback, more thoughts, more engagement, you've seen a radicalization where certain Sikhs begin to congregate and amongst very specific circles, where in some ways they just continue to preach to the choir to those that have the same belief and further radicalize those that don't. And this is not something limited to the Sikh community. This is something that's been talked about, if I use again the example of the United States, as political blogs have been, where people go to specific areas to get their information, and oftentimes that leads to certain kind of radicalization of pre-existing viewpoints. So in many ways, the internet has been sort of the grandiose visions in the beginning of how the internet would be used to kind of bring together a cyber sangat has not occurred, and in many ways has actually even led to certain types of fragmentation within the community as well, as certain groups only go to certain sites to gain whatever information that they'd like to gain. also linked to that is the idea of where the internet continues to be a certain Khalistani space. Even within that Khalistani space, there are certain groups that have greater internet presence, and at least online in some way, a much greater voice that in some way far exceeds probably their actual numbers or actual voice offline. Referring again to this sort of Generation 2, and this has been an argument that I've been making sort of in the past, especially with the Sikh youth, that kind of post-1993 this generation of Sikhs, you're really beginning to see the end of what was once a sort of psychological kind of tragedy that was on the mind. What you are seeing very much so across the community is a sort of a resurgence in what I'll call a Sikh turn, but in a very sort of unexpected way and in a very different way, which the community is still coming to grips with. It is not in the traditional Khalsa symbolic form of the Khalsa identity, but what you do have is sort of a religio-ethnic movement that is very much a product of sort of Khalistani rhetoric that was used during the 80s and 90s as well. In Punjab in particular, you're seeing that mobilization occur due to the teledensity, that the number of people with cell phones in Punjab and the usage of SMS text messaging is so huge compared to anywhere else in really anywhere in South Asia. We saw this kind of really come to pass during the Dera Sacha Sola events of a few years ago, as well as in some ways where we see various Sikhs, whatever their talents may or may not be, but their victories in various game shows, that in many ways there is an engagement with the community in a very new form, in a very different form, which many of those that kind of see ourselves as activists are still kind of coming to grips with how it's different than in the past and what to sort of make out of it today. So related to this then becomes ways to kind of build this into some kind of, and channel this into something through the internet. You're also seeing, new engagements within the arts, and it's really in the Sikh arts that you are seeing, although for instance these artists that I have displayed on your screen would would not like me calling them Sikh artists, but obviously their Sikh identity and that which sprouts from their own understandings and interpretations of Sikhi are very much part of their music and engagement with the arts. And it's really sort of the most cutting-edge materials are really beginning to come out of this community, and with kind of greater feedback from those Sikh activists in other dimensions as well. What you have sort of is where the community really does mobilize in new ways when a defined purpose or a defined mission is there. So if I use the example again of Ishmeet Singh and his victory on this sort of equivalent of an American Idol game show in India, where the community mobilizes in sort of new ways for whatever exactly it wants. And if you have a sort of defined purpose, your organization does, anyways, then you'll find the power of the internet in terms of mobilization, but only if you have a defined purpose. And I use kind of two examples to kind of show where we saw this kind of early forming within the internet. What you had was a competition on a television show, on the television network a couple of years ago, with a huge internet participation of defining what would be the new 7 wonders of the world. And Sikhs from across the world tried to basically move to have Darbar Sahib in Amritsar included as one of them. We saw, throughout the internet, whether it be through the use of listers, whether it be through the use of internet websites, sikhnet.com probably being the most important, which continues to be that and the Daily Ajit probably the two in terms of the number of internet hits, those that generate the most traffic, tried to garner support. Although the Darbar Sahib, at least in this sort of popularity vote competition, did not end up becoming one of the, or at least named by this particular competition as one of the 7 modern wonders of the world. It's sort of an early example of ways that we started seeing kind of mobilization campaigns within the community. A new one that we saw in 2009, culminating in June, but continuing even to November, is a campaign that came out of a number of Sikhs in England, which was to the goal of having 1 million Jolpe Sahibs read. They did, I believe, by June actually reach their effort, but here's kind of something very new, where you're seeing the internet dissemination of a certain idea that began to be picked up throughout the world, everywhere from Australia to Malaysia to Singapore to the United States to Canada, beginning to participate. So this sort of Jolpe Sahib idea has sort of starting to become the bridge of where you're starting to see certain online forms of mobilization actually generate into something meaningful offline. And it is this trend that we're going to see more and more in the community, that how do we use online opportunities for offline realities? If we have community visions, then we can actually have various possibilities. And now I'm going to basically continue on to a new possibility as such, and kind of talk about sort of mobilizations that have occurred to make that true. So, for instance, just by kind of gazing a little bit about our participants, some of you may or may not know that there was actually a Chase Bank competition. Chase Bank being J.P. Morgan Chase, a huge multinational bank based here in the United States, but located with various chains and under different names throughout the world, created a competition on Facebook that saw whichever group would get the most votes would that's how they would choose to basically donate the money that they have to give to various nonprofit groups as well. Over 500,000 nonprofit organizations throughout the United States competed in this, and only 100 moved to the second round. The Jakarta movement was one such organization that was able to do that. Many people have kind of come to me afterwards saying, how did they do that? And there were a number of reasons, but the main thing was a huge mobilization of online and offline channels. There were 2 main Sikh organizations, or Sikh-based organizations, that were able to most successfully do that. One being the Jakarta movement, the other being an organization started in Michigan known as Success. And the way they really did that was where these 2 organizations in particular have a huge network of volunteers that are oftentimes concentrated in particular locales, and we're able to sort of really get the vote in that way. Other bridges were made, for instance, which were highly successful as well, and really kind of speak to a certain success and collaboration and partnership within the Sikh community, was the creation, in particular of this project, of what was called the Sikh Slate. And here we saw a number of Sikh organizations come together saying that we are going to advocate votes together. This included Surth, the Sikh conference that is held annually in New York. It included Salvef. It included Success. It included Jakarta Movement. Sikh Coalition and Sikh Research Institute were included in the original discussions, but for various reasons where they were trying to figure things out with Chase, they were not able to get inside the competition to actually kind of go forward with it, as well as NSOF being another important organization that was included in there. So you saw sort of a mobilization happen where groups were also willing to work together for sort of what was believed a common cause and a mutual benefit. Now, in the next round of this, and this is where I kind of come to the importance of having set defined purposes in a concrete dream, is in the second round for this competition, which will be from January 15th through the 22nd, so just coming up in about a week, a little bit less than a week. Is, for instance, for the Jakarta movement, where we're sort of defining what we see as a $1 million dream in the community, that should the Jakarta movement be sort of where we're in a unique position to be sort of the flag bearer, you could say, for the community for this project, that if we can begin to make a kind of mass mobilized, what would be the $1 million dream of the community? Taking a bunch of different feedback from various people in the community, there were sort of two projects that were seen as the most important, or at least that the group wanted to most kind of engage with. One being the absolute necessity of a women's center and a domestic violence shelter, which were called sort of the Mata Gujari Sikh Women's Center. And this isn't just a dream, but this is actually a community need, and the importance that as a community where we need to embrace challenges and create sanctuaries for those in need. And the second one, especially having a sort of worldwide, which has become sort of a worldwide worldwide importance, is the idea for a Sikh museum. You have seen this in terms of online and virtual Sikh museums, but it also shows the limitations. You have the amazing work that was done by Sandeep Singh Brar, one of the early web designers of Sikhs.org, and his website, Sikh Museum, as well as you see the new work of groups like Punjab Digital Library that are doing sort of amazing stuff in terms of digitizing the Sikh heritage. But still there's sort of an idea that online is great, digitization is great, and all these things are absolutely needed, but in some ways a physical place is still required. And so this is sort of becoming, for at least the Jakarta movement, as I said, as something to kind of, as a flag bearer within the community, in the sense that a public commitment to these two projects, that all monies would not be used, all monies would be used for these two projects, as opposed to being used organizationally, that it would be to kind of push forward on these ideas of a community dream. And so how do you create a global movement? You create toolkits and channels for people to get involved. We've created, for instance, as in a case study example that you can see, is a website that we created, votesikh.com. And as I stated, that the numbers would be, for the dates of voting would be from January 15th through the 22nd, so coming up in less than a week. But all the tools are there on the website for people throughout the world to download and to use, everything from a MP3 Punjabi radio announcement that can hopefully be played on Punjabi radio stations everywhere from England to Kenya to Uganda, Malaysia, and beyond, to flyers and posters written in Punjabi and English to be distributed, to be placed at various gurdwaras and any other place where kind of Sikhs congregate together. How does this occur? Do you just put this on the internet and it flies? Of course not. It's just as the way to create a global movement is to bridge online and offline activism and engagement tools. It's also making offline contacts and real human-to-human contacts with people, organizations, and institutions within these kind of various localities, and sort of creating a kind of bridge network to kind of come together. Where this is extremely, this will be extremely important in the future, is that here where we saw against with the Generation 1.5 activism, where you saw the very beginning of Sikh listservs being a way where a sort of global Sikh network that they continue to tap into even today form. Here you're going to see the possibilities beginning to open, especially as more corporate money is being used this way. Here I spoke of Chase Bank on Facebook, but for instance, companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi are doing the same thing as new ways that we can leverage as a small, nimble community. We can leverage our global presence, as well as our, in many ways, high degree of solidarity and community cohesion to our advantage if we kind of take advantage of this. So it'll be interesting to see how this VoteSikh.com campaign actually works out. And I highly, highly encourage all of you to take a look at the website. And not just take a look at the website, I'm going to implore you guys to become active participants and take ownership of it as well, distributing these materials wherever you can. And with that, I'm going to begin kind of concluding at least the part where you got to bear with me as I droned on for some time, but hopefully some of this could be of use to various Sikh organizations, or at least food for thought for people as well. So I'm going to start actually looking specifically at the questions that are now beginning to come in. The first question via Narendra Paul Singh, the moderator, has sent me, comes from Harvinder Singh, who asked, how many votes did Jakarta and Success get, and how many votes did the winners get? So as many corporations are kind of newly trying to use internet and online tools, and partially for their own various purposes, this is sort of a unique opportunity in terms of it's actually a fairly low threshold to win in these things right now. And I'm sure Chase Bank, for instance, is going to revisit this if they continue this competition next year. So it's hard for me to give you, Harvinder Singh, exact numbers, because on the last few days of voting, basically they disabled the actual votes you could see. So we had an idea going into the end. Within the Jakarta movement, we were tracking numbers of groups every day, looking for trends. So, for instance, the organization that received the most votes was a group called Invisible Children, which does amazing work with children soldiers and sort of their re-education in Africa. And they were basically ahead above everybody else in garnering just under 10,000 votes. I would say probably by the end they got in the 9,000 range. And how it was a fairly sort of, like I said, low threshold to get within the top 100. Success, which sort of began as a bit of a latecomer, but really got a push in terms of being involved with the Sixth Wave as well, probably garnered, when everything went offline, they were probably in the 1,100 range, so they were probably at the 1,700 range. The Jakarta movement, partially because people within the organization jumped on it so quickly, mobilized friends, family, very, very quickly, and has sort of a large base, specifically here in California. Probably ended, we were about 3,300 when it went down to probably about 3,500 to 3,600, placing the Jakarta movement within actually the top 20. But you can actually see the difference between 3,600 and close to 9,000. Harvinder Singh's follow-up question is, what would be my estimate for the number of votes required to win the $1 million? I would say 25,000. 25,000 would be my estimate, which is very, very much doable if we basically work as a community and want to see these $1 million community dreams come true. The next question comes from Inderpal Singh. How do you specifically inspire and ignite Generation 2.0 Sikhs to lead Sikh initiatives using online tools so there is a flurry of Sikh activity? Excellent question. Basically, in the policing, I would actually say in certain ways where Jakarta we have actually sort of a lot of work where we've actually done this before. In many ways, if you look at votesikh.com, if you look at sort of like the toolkit, there are a number of sort of ways that kind of where people can locally engage and feel part of something. Now, turning this to kind of how do you get them to lead Sikh initiatives by online tools, it's a combination of offline and online tools. For instance, the Jakarta movement, we put on a youth camp in concurrently on the same day in now we're up to 17 cities throughout California and a few neighboring states in Arizona as well on a single day. How do we do this? It's a huge mobilization. You're looking at something like 250 to 300 volunteers and engaging with, sometimes close to 1,500 to 2,000 children, young children, for a workshop on a single day to make them feel like they were part of something larger than just themselves. How do you do that? You provide them the tools, which can be provided online. You provide them the content, and then you get sort of local people to implement. One of the biggest problems that I see actually within the Sikh community is where we're kind of, and partially it comes from our community makeup, but that we are very ageist, where we, in the way we defer to age and authority, and there are very important reasons why we do that, and there are very important outcomes that come out because we do that. But also in so doing, we also are always looking for experts, and if we want to see in Nepal, as you call a flurry of Sikh activity, it has to be that where you can engage people and push them to do it, even if they're not an expert, because oftentimes when you learn about something, when you put on an activity, when you put on a workshop, much more than possibly anyone in the audience, you will have sort of learned the most. I'm under I know in putting together this presentation, whatever 2% hopefully you take away from it, at least for me as that activity of sort of putting this together, I've become much more clear in terms of what were some of the successes, what are some of the failures, and how do you kind of trace this in a larger historic narrative of how this particular moment will be understood within Sikh history as well. Third question comes from Maninder Singh from Sugar in Texas. How this movement is going to make sure that the works of the non-computer literate scholars of Sikhism find its place or presence in cyberspace? Good question, because still there are huge sections of our community that absolutely are not computer literate. But the thing is sort of branching out and engaging with them in the areas wherever they do feel comfortable and ready. So specifically the question, I guess, asking about scholarship, then there are sort of avenues of kind of publication. There are kind of avenues that if you're within sort of these scholarly milieus, and I'm talking about community scholarly milieus, not just academic scholarly milieus. There's, for instance, Jaspir Singh Man out of Orange County, and a number of people sort of associated with him kind of already have a sort of coterie that they kind of get together and get to talk about various issues with. So within Punjabi and in English, they upload these things onto the internet. How far is the readership? That question, that's a different sort of question. Partially also comes through is what are the tools using? If you're only using a content distribution model, which is what most Sikh organizations only do, and like I said, if you want to start seeing examples of those that are moving away from that, I would definitely suggest you to look at the Jakarta movement, but it's really the Sikh activist network out of the Ontario area in Canada as ways that you're kind of seeing as groups kind of going beyond that and really engaging people where it's not just where you're top-down sending out materials for people to digest, but actually kind of creating an engagement where they can actually even create materials and become part of that conversation and discussion as well. Question from a participant, can I provide my contact information? Absolutely. If you want to get into contact with the Jakarta movement, you can go to their website. I will check that out. Or you can send an email to info@jakarta.org. Or you can call the number, which is 1-888-C. This is also part of it too. You have to give multiple ways of being able to get in contact with you. And if you need my personal email, feel free. Just don't send me forwards. My parents send me too many of those already as it is. So that's my personal email as well that I've just sent out. So like I said, that's my lame joke. Don't send me too many forwards, because my mother just discovered email, and just as we were doing in the late 1990s, she sends me a lot of forwards. Still taking any other questions?
Anjiviji, this is Narinder Pal Singh, Whitby, Ontario. I have a question, which is, just as in the past, the youth was felt alienated from the perhaps their parents, and perhaps from the traditional sort of the activities in our communities. Going forward, it would appear then that with the momentum that the internet, sort of Web 2 and such, and these activities are sort of the momentum is increasing in this regard. Perhaps there would be a concern for alienating the traditionals who may not, as you just mentioned earlier. My own mom, for example, is not quite, she wouldn't be surfing the internet or would be using any activities, and I don't foresee that happening. And there are a lot of people who are in that, perhaps in that category, if I say so. What are some of the things that can be done that can bridge the gap between moving forward between these types of sort of technical, very technology-oriented approach, and with those who are perhaps even a very large portion of our community, which perhaps may be missing out on these types of things. What have you seen that the technology files, or if through the web technology we can make sure that individuals, a very large portion of our Sikh community, can be kept sort of in touch as well?
Excellent question. I completely agree with you that, especially at the current stage within the community, more people will watch on a given program on Desh Pradesh television station than will go to any website. What you have seen is kind of the beginning of where I believe you've already kind of reached sort of the critical point where more and more people, whether it be in Punjab itself or whether it be in many of the countries that we're calling from, have already kind of made that transition, where you don't want to leave that gap, especially, for instance, your mother, my mother, or many others who may be wanting to kind of participate in this as well, is the need basically that you continuously need to have kind of that reach out within the community, especially the point being that of the Gurdwara, that at the end of the day, posters need to be put up, announcements have to be made on those media channels that continue to be in many ways more impactful, that were created by what I would call Generation 1 activists. And these are the Punjabi television stations, and these are the Punjabi radio stations. their listenership is still much higher than whatever we see on the internet. You have specific types of people coming on the internet, but absolutely you cannot jump over that and not engage with the general part of the population. And many of those that would absolutely love to participate in such things, but aren't always comfortable with the technology to be able to do that. So it'd be rather great aggrandizement if someone sort of became too kind of, as you said, become a techie-phile or technophile, where they saw that this is going to be the only future. There will be many futures, and there are going to be people that sort of engage with one or the other, but especially for anyone kind of seeing themselves as a Sikh activist, they very much need to keep that in mind, that you have to go through older channels as well, because in many ways their outreach is still much more. On this, for instance, Vote Sikh campaign, talking to, if I use the example there in Ontario, I was talking to a Sikh member, a well-known Sikh activist there in the Toronto area, and he said, for the concentration should be in terms of if you want to vote on Facebook, you need to use Facebook advertisements. He gave me the example, for instance, of One Month, which was an event, and of One Month as an example of an organization and various events. They were able to really sort of capitalize on that. But along with that, you cannot only rely on the internet, because you need sort of various channels. Even for some parents, to allow their child to even attend these things that their child might have found out about on the internet, the parent themselves needs to have some kind of buy-in and engagement with it, which will come out through Punjabi radio stations, Punjabi television stations, announcements at the Gurdwara, posters at the Gurdwara, flyers at your local Desi store. That there's no way that you can sort of kind of jump over this, and nor should anybody even try to. And hence, even, like I said, if you can use that case study as the Vote Sikh website, you're going to find all these materials located there, and for the most part still within traditional kind of local means, where people can kind of feel locally engaged and locally involved with this kind of larger $1 million dream project.
Hanji, Vaj Khalsa, Vaj Fateh to all participants. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them now. Thank you.
I guess to begin wrapping up, if there aren't any questions, otherwise feel free to, again, send them to Narendra Paul Virji. So really, as part of your organizations, part of your individual activism, and in part to kind of understand, sort of trace a greater trajectory of how this kind of fits within the broader scope of things, it is kind of understanding what has been the usage of the internet, and again, kind of emphasis on this sort of top-down model of only content distribution. And really, to begin to rethink this, you'll end up with better events, you'll end up with better projects, and you'll end up with even more people coming, if to begin to rethink to how these medias can be used. Some of these are very fad-ish, but they'll be popular for now, and there'll probably be a kind of a reaction against them later. But at least in the interim, that these can be real ways to kind of mobilize our community as a kind of a global movement, if I go back to the title. And so really, like I said, you can all become part of this one that we're doing, this votesikh.com. I strongly encourage you, and use this kind of within your own organization or within your own activism, that the tools here, learn from them, use them, because this is sort of how we're going to, as more and more opportunities begin to open up online, it is for our community, which is very nimble, very quick. We have a high amount of sort of lateral education where we learn from others very quickly to take advantage of this. And our community really still has the possibility and will do very great things. With that, I thank you for listening. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh, and turn it back over to the esteemed host and moderator.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Firstly, thank you very much to Nandi Singh Ji, and thank you again for tuning in. We normally have a feedback survey, but unfortunately I won't be able to launch it today, so what I'm going to do is send an email to everyone who attended with the feedback survey, and if you could email it back, we'd be grateful. As always, if you have any questions surrounding the webinar in general, then you can contact us on info@sikhri.org. Because there's no feedback survey today, I'm going to turn off the session in the next couple of minutes in case you have any questions. So once again, thank you all for attending, and look forward to seeing you in the next sessions.